Welcome to the podcast where we discuss all about Bethlehem and its future. I'm your host, Ryan Conrad. We're diving into the stories, ideas, and people that make our community shine. So let's talk Bethlehem. All right. I'm really excited today. Our guest today is a true pillar of the Bethlehem community with deep family roots dating back generations. He's dedicated his life to education, civic leadership, strategic planning, helping shape the very foundation of our town. He's been a teacher, a coach, led major infrastructure projects like the Bethlehem Water Bond, and played a key role in developing our parks and community resources. He's also a historian, a writer, someone who believes in making decisions for the good of the many, not just a few. Today, we're diving into perspective on Bethlehem's past, present, and future, and the lessons he's learned from decades of leadership and service. Please welcome Dr. Warren Hollar. So glad you're here.
Well, that was a good introduction. My wife would probably say, why in the world is he saying those nice things? Really, I'm just kind of an old man that wanders around from place to place, and I think, like you say, the thing that's most important to me is that whatever things we get involved with, we've got to look at what's for the good of the entire Bethlehem community. And, if we get off at looking at small pieces, then we have difficulties.
Yeah.
And that's held true for years and years and years.
Yeah. I also, before we get started, I want to give a shout out. I had a little quiz on social media. I know you don't have a lot of presence there, but give a shout out to Joyce McCroskey. She was the winner on guessing our special guest today. So shout out to Joyce. Warren, you've got deep roots in Bethlehem. Your family has been here for generations. What was Bethlehem like when you were growing up, and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, how about I take you back to the beginning of the Hollars in Bethlehem and the Moretzes, and way back in the day, in the early at the turn of the century, and back 100 years ago or 120 years ago, my grandmother she was probably a Renaissance woman. Mm-hmm. She had her own business over on the Eichard Ridge Road. She did all kinds of things to carry into the Shufords and other people in Hickory. She'd go across the Moores Ferry to take those things to them. And occasionally she'd get kind of aggravated at the rich people because the only bit of water was the Eichard Dam, and they had these Chris Craft boats. Now, imagine this. This is like 1910 to 1920. Mm-hmm. So she would yell at them about the boats making too much noise and scaring the cattle there.
Yeah. Well, I can echo the sentiment of the boat noise. We certainly get it from here.
Absolutely. But, I just go on from there. This is the 100th anniversary of Bethlehem Elementary School.
That's right.
And we're doing some things special. I've been long gone, 25 years from Bethlehem Elementary School, but I really do have deep roots there. Mm-hmm. My parents were in the first group of graduates of Bethlehem High School. And matter of fact, I imagine my dad may have kissed my mom behind the blackboard there, and that might have been the start of a love affair that wound up with 6 boys. And, when you start thinking about all the things that have gone on in Bethlehem, it's been looking at what's good, what is for the good of the cause.
Yeah.
And, that's been one of my philosophy for years and years and years, that if you listen to people and you have good vibes about people, mm-hmm. they'll come up with the best answers, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been a strong proponent of just saying, I think it's really important to just get involved with the people that have already done a little bit of work here and carried some sort of torch, and continue to carry that torch in some sense. It may not be in the same direction that they originally started, but they've picked it up and carried it in some direction instead of lighting your own torch and moving.
I would say my wife is very clear to me that you don't ever toot your own horn, but I have had some involvement in terms of throughout Western North Carolina. I was the president of the Northwest North Carolina Development Association, local community development. I served on the Region E Council of Governments. I started out as a teacher and coach and principal, and then in the central office was in the superintendent's role. I was a doctoral on staff at UNC Charlotte, working with strategic planning and those kinds of things. And just basically, my feelings are that the first thing that you need to do if you're going to bring another initiative to the table, that you set priorities on how it's going to impact the community. And I know there's a great deal of discussion about the issue of incorporation. There's been discussion about whether there should be annexation. That's a dead issue because the 2012 law said that that's not going to happen. You have to ask to be annexed. Plus, we're in a different judicial district and all that. That's taken care of.
And I've been saying that for every episode. It feels like, other than the last, it just wasn't about it. But it's not like Russia just comes in and says, "Hey, we want your town," and we don't get a say in it. It just doesn't work like that. And
I just think it's important that we let people have their say, whether or not they have their way. That's kind of a mantra I'm a firm believer in. I really think, from the standpoint, I was president of the Community Development Association for years. I just give you an example of the Bethlehem school thing. We worked with the school bond in 1980. One had failed. That was for the entire county. We had schools that were not in great shape. The bricks were falling off of Stony Point School and a lot of different things. So that bond passed, and during that period of time, there was a water bond, too, in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And that water bond failed the first time because people didn't have good information about it, and it passed the second time with the people working together.
Right.
And since it failed that first time, it cost Bethlehem tens of thousands of dollars because you had to do it again, and the people over on Highway 16 were able to do theirs, and they saved some money over there. So, infrastructure is very important to me.
Yeah. Well, circling back to like introduction, like your just historical perspective of things. Your grandmother was a business owner, and your father was a baseball player at the semi-pro level, which is just so awesome. They really cool story. But how did their experiences shape your view of hard work and community and leadership?
Well, I think that the most important thing that my grandmother told me was that you make sure, if you don't have something good to say about somebody, that it's best to keep your mouth shut. Now, that's been one of the hardest things for me to say or do. But
me too. I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut.
When I was a school principal, I was at Bethlehem School forever. I was there about 19 years, and we went up to have a meeting the other day, and the new principal said the first thing that really struck me. She said, "You're the oldest living principal of Bethlehem Elementary School, former principal." And I said, "God, I know I'm getting bald, but I don't know about that." But just from the standpoint of how that school operated over the years, it took a special group of people to combine 5 little schools and form the Bethlehem School.
Yeah.
And all the things that went on. And, again, the school was rebuilt. And
remember that? We were right there. Like, I think my kindergarten year was the first year the renovation of that school happened. It's like 19, or it might have been either 90 or 89 or somewhere around in there.
1990 to 1991 was when it was finished up there. But again, the way we went about doing that, and it has relationship to this other thing that you've been talking about, we did a great deal of pre-planning in terms of how that school should be built. We involved parents, we involved teachers, we involved children, all talking about what their vision might be of that Bethlehem school. And I think that worked very well. Throughout my work in strategic planning, it's so important that we don't just try to have a small group. And the people that are pro-incorporation and those that are not, they're still good people.
Yeah.
Because within their own view,
they're passionate.
They're passionate. They want what's best for Bethlehem. And, sometimes we have to look at what's for the good of the whole instead of the good of the few. And if we don't do that, we start running into a situation where we start pointing fingers at each other. And
I think that it's gotten at that point, and I don't want it to be that way. And I don't want to feel like I'm been partially the catalyst for that. But I do feel like we are somewhat responsible for that. And I want to change it, but I think that the approach that's been presented is going to have to change in order for me to change the way I feel about it,
Yeah, let me tell you some stories. And
okay.
If I get too long-winded, you call me off.
No,
right?
this is
I've
not
written,
entirely scripted. I would rather you just say what's important at the time, and we'll go from there.
I've written a lot, and again, my wife would jump on me, but I've written from the very beginning when maybe DeSoto was along the Catawba River, and all the things that's happened with my grandmother crossing the ferries, the bridges that were being there, the floods that came. One thing that, and I'm getting off script a little bit, but I wanted to get this in.
Sure, yeah.
The Catawba River is the 5th most endangered river in the United States.
Wow, I had no idea about that. I didn't.
And I think as we start looking at the things that we put as priorities, that we do that. But going back to the stories I was going to tell, we've had a lot of situations over our history when people have come through. Bishop Spangenberg, you've heard of the Moravians in Winston-Salem. He came through, and a guy named Jonathan Barrett and Samuel Oxford. You've heard of Oxford Dam, and have you heard?
Yep.
Well, they talked, our friend Spangenberg about, he liked the looks of Bethlehem, and he was thinking about having the Moravians build in Bethlehem, either that or over in eastern Catawba County. But they decided to go on around and wound up back in the Winston-Salem area.
Okay.
Other things are the same, have occurred over the same way. Barrett built the Barrett Road that ran from where Highway 16 was all the way up to Granite Falls along the cliffs of the Catawba River. And we had the Oxford crossing with Samuel Oxford. It was one of the 3 primary routes down the Great Wagon Road through Alexander County down Highway 16. So the point I'm making is there have been a lot of opportunities in Bethlehem, and now we just need to look at the fact that our population's increasing and what can we do and how can we go about meeting the needs for the greatest number of people.
Yeah, I'm totally with that.
I live up, when I grew up, I was up on a place called Hogan's Mountain. And in Hogan's Mountain, we had a lot of neat things that were going on. We had work that we had to do, et cetera. When my brother passed away, he had a lot of the land, and I had some land there. And all of a sudden, I drive in, and there's a horse arena right next to my land there, which I'm not happy about, but I checked the regulations, and guess what?
They're within their means.
They're within their means.
Yeah.
If you look over in Catawba County, you've got in the high teens the number of developments over there. I imagine the same thing is going on over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're referring to that where that old horse barn is to the right here? Yeah. I was really happy to hear that they're actually not going to tear that down. It's actually going to be sort of a clubhouse kind of convention, sort of multi-purpose center.
Yeah.
So I was glad to see that they weren't going to tear down that barn. I remember seeing that thing since I was a little kid.
Yeah. The golf course, we played golf over at Hampton Heights, not very well. Over on Sandy Ridge Road.
Many, many a times I've played over there.
Yeah. Sandy Ridge Road, they've got all those going on. We won't even talk about down in southern Catawba County, but
it's happening.
Let's get back on target. Ask me a question then.
Okay, I will, but first I got to say, I remember, you mentioned Hampton Heights. I remember being young and nearly barefooted, taking our little Cocker Spaniel out on that Hamptons Heights golf course. And I'm making that point because most of the golf courses now, you have to have a polo shirt and a fancy outfit, and everybody has to be playing. And that was like the last golf course that I knew of that where you could just go and just have fun and not have to be
exactly
so pomp and circumstance going in there. But yeah, sure. Okay. So the next question is, in your writing, you've mentioned Bethlehem's growing need for services like medical facilities and transportation. What steps do you think the county should take to address these needs?
Okay. First of all, I think you have to look at what's going on throughout North Carolina and the great number of senior citizens that are moving to our area and the increases in populations. You know, I might get off a little bit about the growth in North Carolina. It's one of the highest growing states. There has to be a place for those individuals. And, Hickory area was said to be one of the best places to live, and obviously people started thinking about that. And if you look around places like Raleigh, you look at Charlotte, you look at Wilmington, all those places have just boomed, and it's starting to be like a hurricane where it's coming on out, and
working its way.
And we just happen to be there. But the things I would think that we need most, number one, we need to reinstitute the Community Development Association. And that Community Development Association, which was instituted way back when in the 60s, we had representatives from the churches, we had representatives from the various areas of Bethlehem, we had representatives of clubs, we had many business people, we had people who were farmers, and all those people were able to come together and talk about the best direction to go. And, you know, like when that water bond failed, which got into some name calling, et cetera, we came back with the other water bond and we brought the people together. And we talked about the things that we need. We'd be in a world of hurt if that water bond hadn't passed. And, you know, we got that 1 million gallon tank that's coming up too.
Gary was talking about that in 2 episodes ago. So, yeah.
But getting on back, the whole issue of working together, I think that needs to be reinstituted. I think, from the standpoint of what I've heard about the promotion for the formation of a town, it may have not been thought out completely because I talked about Hogan's Mountain a while ago. There's many, many people in Bethlehem 1 and 2 that have no connection to Bethlehem that aren't interested in the things that have the same interest along the lake. And if we're going to look at the Community Development Association arrangement, then we get people from there that can talk about their needs.
Well, I have to say that one thing that kind of concerns me is the first go-around. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but when we were trying to pass the alcohol laws here in Bethlehem, first go-around, it failed.
Yes.
And it was and I really, really just feel like that happened because not enough people were educated enough to know, and not enough people actually went out to vote. And the second go around, a lot of people came out and said, this is important. We should think about this, it's a lot of lost revenue and this and that and a lot of opportunity. And Gary, if y'all go back to episode 3 with Gary, he'll talk about that, like the importance of it. But it's just sort of a similar situation where the first go around, it's like it didn't quite reach everybody. So that's what's more concerning now about the incorporation is to make sure that we reach everybody. I mean, we have a group of about 1,000 people where on Facebook we've talked about this, and they're very much on the same page. And I'm not sure how many people on the other side that have their group, but there's still, what is it, the population of Bethlehem now? It doesn't even really hold a candle.
Well, I think if you were looking at Bethlehem 1 and 2, you're looking like 7,000
That's
people.
about what I was thinking.
And if you've got to look at the people that live along the lake have different needs than the people on Hogan's Mountain or other places. And if you don't listen to them, you're in trouble. But going back to what you said about the most important, I said about the 5th most endangered river in the United States. I think we can do more for our sanitary sewer. We are getting another line, but it'll end. It'll end near your place up here. There'll be a pump station there, and I understand there's some carrying capacity. I really would love to see an emphasis be placed on either a bond referendum or a sanitary district to be formed to take care of the many people who have septic tanks along the lake. I personally know some people that have 2 septic tanks sitting right on the lake and no place to put other septic tanks. Yeah. And, that's has to be taken care of at some point.
Right.
And I see that way up ahead of zoning. You look at all the development over there, they have zoning over there. They work with the Western Piedmont Council of Governments. Our people did. And you can't just say, I don't like this, so let's change the rules. That's not the way it works.
Right.
And going one more thing, transportation. I shudder to think about, as an old person, being almost 76, if I'd have a heart attack and the bridge
goes out. Yeah.
We really need, along with the Community Development Association, to have a concerted effort where we can talk about. Right now, construction of roads in North Carolina is impacted by 2 things: Helene, and secondly, traffic counts.
I heard that's we were talking about that. I don't remember who I was talking with. That we knew that the plans to make a 4-lane here and have 2 bridges and all that stuff, which was good to hear. We were going to address that, but it's really been pushed back because of Helene. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, not just Helene, but they got behind, and so many.
A government always gets behind.
Yeah,
it feels like.
Yeah, just so many people moved in, and if you go to these high population areas, you see that, and that's truly is one of the arguments as far as what's happening here, east and west. Barrett made his road. One of the things we need to have, if we can't get a bridge, is look at what we can do with the secondary roads east and west along the lake there. If you go in Caldwell County, you see roundabouts, and I know I don't like roundabouts, but that's a good way to move people.
Yeah.
I think you really have to look at how you establish your roads there as well. So that's one of the things infrastructure-wise that I think must be taken a look at, and that we do a good job of talking about the fact that we don't have a hospital in Alexander County. We don't have emergency facilities. So
yeah. I'll just touch on this for a second, then I'm going to kind of ask a question unrelated to this. One of the things that's kind of concerning is there was a hospital in Taylorsville. There's no longer one. It's, I think at this point, condemned. Do you know the details on that? I mean, but what's more, what I'm getting at is what's concerning is people that are even further. If in Bethlehem, we could shoot over and hit Oxford Road and still get to at some point, it's going to cut you back 5-10 minutes, but 5-10 minutes is life and death for some people. But what about the folks that are farther into Alexander County, and they're even further away from emergency care? So, yeah, it's a real concern.
And I will make it clear that there is a comprehensive plan. I'm not lambasting what's going on within county government. What I'm saying, they've looked at the things that need to be done through, I think it's 2045. And many of the things I've mentioned, they've looked at as well. But when you have unlimited desires and limited resources, it's a little bit like eating turnips. You have to eat a little of it at a time and find ways to address that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that analogy. That's a good one. So the little curveball I was going to throw is, because I wanted to, you were in the school system. I really wanted to touch on this subject, and we'll certainly cover it some more down the road about, the educational system. But we've seen a decline in the public students. We've also seen how badly the funding is for resources and pay for our teachers. Do you think the biggest threat to public education is funding or attendance?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to look at is we have a formula in North Carolina. I was in the superintendent's role for a short period and some other roles there. and there's something called average daily membership, that the money comes from the state to the school systems based on the number of students. And unfortunately, back 25 years ago, when I was down there was over like 5,500 students, and now it's down between 4,000 and 4,500. I don't know the exact number. And when you take that chunk of money away from the school system, and working with budgets for the school system, is you have a tax rate that you deal with, and I can get into this thing about sales tax, that the proponents of the town want to bring the sales tax in. But that's just increasing taxes for everyone, because there will have to be a corresponding amount of taxes that the county will have to go up to fund certain kinds of things, schools being one of them. And, sooner or later, and this is a bad word, we love our community schools. And at some point, there'll have to be some decisions made if things continue at the rate with a reduction in the number of students. The birth rate is down significantly, and with the birth rate being down, that creates a situation where not going to be as many kids coming in. And let's face it, too, being a public school person, I recognize the number of private schools, church schools, etc. I don't have a problem with those. I think everyone has the right to choose where they're going to send their children. I'm just saying, if we're going to maintain our public schools, then it may involve closing some schools. It may involve looking at what's most important there. And it's some tough decisions, and it's not systemic to just Alexander County. It's all over the nation, because there's fewer and fewer kids, and there's a move more toward making money available to private schools, et cetera, which has a negative impact on public schools.
Yeah. I'll give you my 2 cents on this.
Okay.
And it may be worth nothing, but so my biggest issue with homeschooling and private schools is, for one, at least at this point, they're smaller. They're a little more exclusive. And usually, especially I think in private schools, there's this sort of energy about it that doesn't quite translate into what a public school would be, which is sort of, in my mind, all-inclusive and that. And I won't go down that rabbit hole, but there's also this thought in my these are all my opinions, take them at face value, but homeschooling, you don't quite get that social interaction that I feel like is really important as you become an adult. And I know that there's going to be some listeners here that homeschool their kids, and don't think that I'm talking bad about it, because I know everybody has their own reasons for wanting to do that, whether it be just controlling how they're learning and what they're learning and how it's all that stuff. And I understand partially that, but the one thing that concerns me is, like, once they have reached the end of their homeschooling, when they become adults and go into life, I feel like those lessons of conflict resolution and how to deal socially with other people becomes a challenge for them, because they didn't have that experience. I mean, does that make any sense?
I would say there's two sides to that issue.
Yeah.
Again, my wife would say, "Why are you saying that?" But I spent 9 years in strategic planning. I was what was called a clinician with the doctoral and MSA program for people that were trained to be school principals and school superintendents. And we had a number of discussions there in terms of how we meet the needs of a broad range of students. And we could really get into that. There have been some really strong efforts on the part of many home schools where they have, like, every other Friday that they have a group for social development.
Yeah. I've heard about that. And that's a great thing.
Yeah, and each person from the very beginning had their right in terms of how they went about, and then the public schools came along. I'm really at the very end. I have a prediction that I'll tell you to end this stuff. Okay.
Okay. And I'll also say I have a really, really, really close friend that not in this county but grew up in this county who homeschools their kids, and they do exactly that. They have interactions with other kids. They plan events at least once a week where they are interacting with other children. So yeah, that's a wonderful thing, and I'm glad that that's happening because back when we were going to school, it's like you either went to public school or if you were private school, you came out a little strange at the end of it. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
And again, we could talk educational philosophy all day, but what it amounts to. When a teacher takes a group of children in their classroom, I don't care what kind of rules you have, whether it's a private school, a church school, once you close that classroom door, it's what that teacher does between the teacher and the student. Mm-hmm. And I was a firm believer in my years in education that your school was only as good as the weakest teacher that you had in the school. And just from the standpoint of high expectations, whether it's in schools, whether it's how we go about addressing issues within things like roads or things like incorporation or whatever it might be, you have to respect the rights of other people, but at the same time, a little Spockian philosophy here, you do things for the good of the whole instead of the good of the few. Right. And I'm afraid with this consternation about incorporation that we may not be addressing that. We don't have the questions answered as far as, well, am I going to be in the town or am I not going to be in the town?
Yeah.
What's going to be your priorities as far as you spend the tax rate? What are you going to do if you don't have the money to do this, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that's where the Community Development Association comes in. At some point, probably we're going to need some kind of organization. Right now, we have just a census designation for Bethlehem. It's not any kind of incorporation. It's just that designation. Mm-hmm. At some point, as those hurricane bans continue to come with more and more people coming, we'll have to have some decisions made. And that leads into, and I'm talking too much, but it leads into what to do with senior citizens.
Well, this is part of the issue that I have is the folks on fixed incomes. And not everybody that's retired is in this situation, but I know we've got some listeners that are probably really, really tight. I mean, and they have their retirement money, and where they're at right now, they'll make it. But if you add 5% or 10% or 15%, whatever it's going to be on top of their already property taxes, if they're homeowners and not renting, it's concerning what's going to happen with those folks. And we have to think about everybody, like you said. But
I want to talk about seniors just a minute. I know
Sure, go for it.
Being 70, almost 76, there's three things I'm concerned about. One, when I have medical situations, right now I have to wait as long as 2 or 3 months to get an appointment, or I have to go to Winston, or I have to go to Durham for medical situations. I think one of the things that we ought to do way back in the 1970s, we had a situation where we didn't have a doctor in Bethlehem, and Lakemont Park was there. Mm-hmm. And we needed to do something. The Community Development Association recruited Dr. Harris. And I remember him coming, built the building for him so that we'd have medical. Some of the other things that we need to do, we need to have a nursing home. I know that that you can have some of the new construction that's designated. A lot of it is because more and more old people are moving here. Mm-hmm. And I don't want any more that are going to take all my medical appointments, but guess what? I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So all we can do is maybe say, how about some more doctors moving to Bethlehem or moving to Hickory and make it a little easier on the old people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm right there with you. I agree 100% with what you're saying there. It's a tough situation, especially just thinking about. You don't think of all these angles, especially when you're focused on one thing. As simple as just driving through and having used to see woods, and now all of a sudden you're going to see all these homes. And I get it. Like, you want a little bit of privacy, but at what expense and how far are you going to go and keep rolling this train until you start really, really thinking about all these different avenues that you're mentioning right now about, nursing homes, people on fixed incomes. What are the implications of what you're trying to do? How much is that going to affect? How many people is that going to affect in a negative way? And then how many people is it going to affect in a positive way? And I think it really just all comes down to, and which we've all said over and over, that this is going to come down to a vote. And what the most important part of this is making sure that we let people know about this. And I'm not a key political figure in Bethlehem, and I love to talk, and that's why I'm doing this thing. And I would rather just be a catalyst to make sure that everybody knows, both sides, understands it, and then they can make their own decision when they go and get behind the curtain and check yes or no.
Well, I would say to you, the 15% that's been verified there, I think you have to look at what's for the good of the whole county. I told you about building Stony Point School. We finally got a new Bethlehem school. Mm-hmm. Our tax rate's going to be impacted by the entire county. You're not going to cut off taxes to Bethlehem just because you're bringing the sales tax here, mm-hmm. and you're going to go. It's kind of counterintuitive to me that you bring the sales tax here and then you turn right around and you contract with the county to offer the same services that are already there. And that goes back to getting people together and say, what's most important? For this old man, the most important things, obviously, to me, I won't say I'm a tree hugger by any means, but mm-hmm. I'm very concerned about the whole Catawba County chain. It's the fifth most at risk. We need to take care of the sewage over here. Yeah. And I know the county's making good faith efforts, but there's only so much state and federal stuff to do that. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. And, I can go through all this litany again, but mm-hmm. find out what the greatest needs are. And the way you find out the greatest needs is by asking the people. I'd like to see some kind of survey right off the bat to see what the people thought was most important. Yeah. But at the same time, like you were talking about the alcohol initiative, you have to look at the impact on taxes, et cetera. And, just from the standpoint, sooner or later, I don't have any insight to anything, mm-hmm. but I have read the law. The most logical way to handle this issue of incorporation is to have a vote of all the people that are in Bethlehem 1 and 2, mm-hmm. like you said, behind the curtains. Yep. And if they vote to incorporate, I'm all for it. Yeah. If they vote to say no, let's go back and let's look at how we can go about meeting the most needs in Bethlehem and the contiguous areas as well. Yeah. And do it with the people that have spent a lot of work, a lot of thought into Bethlehem. Don't start over is really kind of what I'm saying, because I'm not going to mention anyone specifically just out of respect for them, but there's been a lot of people who've spent a lot of time, including yourself, thinking about the future of Bethlehem, thinking about infrastructure, thinking about the growth. What does that growth look like? And if you don't agree with that, it's okay. Like, you can come and say, all right, hey, I want to get involved with this. What can I do? And go and say, hey, I'm really interested in the zoning infrastructure. I'm concerned about this area. So instead of just
sort of slipping under the rug and trying to start your own government, and so to speak. And you could join up with the people that have already done so much thought, put so much thought and effort into it, and amend things, change things if we need to. That was just totally fine. So, I mean, I hope that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And remember, I said the people that are for zoning aren't bad people.
Right.
The people that are against zoning aren't bad people. But like you say, there's a lens that they're seeing based on their existence. And, you know, when I was involved with the Northwest North Carolina Development Association, I found out a lot about other places. When I was way back in the early 2000s, when I was in the Region E, the Council of Governments there, you know, those people understand how things fit together. And we do have a comprehensive plan in Alexander County. But there's one thing that we don't have. We have great ideas of things that we can do, but we have something called out-migration of young people.
Yeah.
And that out-migration...
Josh covered that in episode 1. Yep, for sure.
You know, out-migration... when we had a JC's or a Rutan Club, the bankers, all the young executives came and joined, and they were the movers and shakers. Mm-hmm. The farmers came, you know, all the people that have those leadership skills, and now they're off in Raleigh, or they're off in Boston, or they're in Charlotte, and we have a dirge of leadership. And, you know, I'd really love to see more people come back home from the standpoint of helping us. And I do have a proposal, and my proposal is that we, you know, it's good to copy other people. One of the movements I've seen around the state, I still, as an old guy wandering around, I still try to keep up with some strategic planning stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think we need to do is come up with a leadership development program for Alexander County. In Catawba County, they have a hired person that works with leadership development. Many places in North Carolina have someone. And I've spoken to people about that in government, having, again, not trying to be a big dog or anything. I've done a lot of strategic planning for school systems and scout councils and groups, and it all goes back to planning, organizing, implementing, and evaluating. And you need to have a certain skill set to be able to do that. And the first thing, you have to have the willingness to step forward and say, yes. It's like the pig and the egg deal. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to decide that, yeah, if I'm going to step out to see changes, then I've got to be willing to give some of my time.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm going to talk about some of that leadership and strategic thinking. You spent years consulting on strategic planning for schools and organizations. What lessons that work do you think Bethlehem could apply to its own future planning?
And again, just finished working with the Piedmont Council. It was 11 counties, led their strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, we divided out into groups that had special interest. You know, the needs of the people along the lake, the people on Hogan's Mountain, the people in the religious community, you know, the numbers of young people, just because of the birth rate declining and the young people moving away, churches are having the same issue as far as, say, we don't have any young people in our church anymore. Mm-hmm. So if we can go about looking at a systemic plan where we can look at planning, organizing, implementing how we can do things, I hope it's not like throwing mud against the wall, but one of the things I found about strategic planning, if you have 3 or 4 groups, you have to have 4 choices. If somebody's working on a particular thing, you have to say, what's your top 3 things? And then from those top 3 things, you bring people together and you negotiate, you talk about the things that are most important and use that as your guidance in terms of how you improve Bethlehem or how you improve any organization.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely. So some community and personal insights. You've worn so many hats: educator, civic leader, historian. What's the most fulfilling part of your journey?
I think it's the goodness of people. If you're in Sunday school this morning, in our Bible study, I was talking about my 94-year-old grandmother that talked about you have to look at the good things in life. Mm-hmm. One of the things I've learned, and I'm not the greatest in it because I still throw darts when I shouldn't be throwing darts.
Me too.
So
we're all guilty at some point.
Yeah, there's two things that we look at, and my son said, don't get off on your doctoral philosophy, but there's two kinds of people in the world. They're nurturing people and they're acidic people. The nurturing people are trying to pull others up by their bootstraps. The acidic people are trying to tear them down. And at some point, you have to decide when you think that you're in the right about something, maybe it's time that you step back and do a little self-evaluation. Mm-hmm. What is motivating you to do that? And for those of you out there who, there's a Jewish philosopher that wrote a book called The Looking Glass Self, and where you think about how others perceive you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important in any leadership. And I think what we have to do with those people that are pro and con with the Incorporation, we have to really listen what they have to say. And if we had a community development association or some group where we could get everybody in a room and we could talk about what people perceive as the best in Bethlehem, may not be what I perceive as best, mm-hmm. or what you perceive as best, but there might be some new ideas mm-hmm. that come out there that we could do some things to really improve where we stand. And, over the years, I found, whether it was 1968 or whether it was 2025, we still have good people that can make good decisions. And let me tell you a story. Here I'm dominating, but
No.
Let me tell you a story. My first involvement with civic stuff, Lakemont Park was up and coming. They bought a bunch of land over there on the hill across the steel bridge. And they started building houses and houses and houses, and people couldn't get across back and forth to Hickory. If you had somebody that spilled watermelons on the bridge, people couldn't get across there. So the Community Development Association hired a bunch of us old boys to take lawn chairs and sit up on the hill there where the steel bridge was. And our job, this was about 1965, was to count cars of people coming across the steel bridge. And they took that data and they presented it to the highway department. And luckily, there was competition between the present bridge in Bethlehem and Tate Boulevard. And because people had come together and were able to present facts, they built the bridge. They got Tate Boulevard mm-hmm. soon after, but it's just a matter of priorities. And if you can make your priority more than someone else by actually coming together and talking and coming up with the facts about a situation and present it in a logical format where you're not up in somebody's face, it's going to work.
I've said this many times. I think a lot of the big issues that we're facing now is not being able to be together with something. We're more connected than ever with social media, but social media has affected us in a way that just isn't the same as being face-to-face with someone. I know you know what I'm talking about here, and everybody else that's listening that's an adult knows what I'm talking about. And it's just this sort of social phenomenon of I can have this conversation with you here in person, or we could have done it by texting each other back and forth, and it would be a whole different conversation. Or you could, one of my biggest antagonist in life came and stood right here, we'd probably, the way that I am, I'm sort of a diplomatic person, we would come to a resolution. But if this conversation were to be had on Facebook or Instagram or wherever we're communicating, it might get really heated. People get really confident when they're not face-to-face with people and say things that really aren't needed and is not constructive. But when we get physically with each other, it's a whole different thing. And I know I've rambled too far about that to make my point, but I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about that. The dilemmas that we face now are different just because of social media.
Well, ownership, that's what it's all about. You know, you don't have to take ownership on some of the social media things. And, you know, it's a lot tougher to say things to their face than not. And I'll tell you another story. I'm full of stories. When I was a school principal, I had a significant number of mad parents about one thing or another, which was part of the job. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, and I'm not trying to be goody two-shoes or anything, but it's just maybe something that the listeners out there can use in their own setting. I didn't sit behind my desk unless I thought somebody was not going to knock me over the head with something, but I'd try to come out and sit right across from them, okay? Mm-hmm. And I ask the question, I say, I understand you're concerned about, and they go, da-da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. And I had a legal pad, and I'd write down, and I'd repeat that to the point that people understood that I was listening what they had to say. Mm-hmm. And then talk about some tangible things that can be done. You know, there's legal, moral, ethical decisions that we have to make, and there's certain legal decisions that people in government who are county commissioners, who are senators, who are whatever it might be, legal requirements that they have, but we've got to make sure that we're making good moral and ethical decisions. And that moral and ethical decisions, you don't have to be a Baptist or a Lutheran or Church of God or whatever, but you can make ethical decisions in terms of how you treat other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm going to just throw one last question at you, and we'll close it up unless you got something really, really important you want to say.
I got one thing I want to say.
Okay, go ahead.
No. You go ahead and end it up if you want. All right, let me go ahead and tell you.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
I predict that we'll have a change in geopolitical structures in North Carolina. In 1847, when Alexander County was formed, the reason it was formed and pulled from 4 counties was that the Court of Pleas was in Warrington. So it took at least a full day to ride there, do your business, and ride back. So there's so many small counties down east and other places that their geopolitical structure could work better should we look at consideration of readdressing the structure of counties, or at least certain performance things that counties do. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at Article 7 of the state constitution, I'll be dead and gone, but I say in 50 years we'll have some changes in geopolitics. So that's my last thing that I'd say. Okay.
And this may be sort of an answer to this one, but so for the last question is, your wife jokingly says that you're an old lion roaring. If you had one last roar to give Bethlehem, what would it be?
I think it goes back to our faith. I think you don't have to call it religious faith. You have to have faith in the goodness of people, that given the circumstance, that they'll make the right decision. And so often we feel like because we don't agree with someone that they're not making the right decision. Mm-hmm. So that looking glass self, try to put yourself in a situation where you're looking to see how that other person perceives you. So that's my last thing. You've got to have faith in other people to make good decisions, and you in turn have to have faith in the fact that they will if you treat them with kindness. Okay? That's it.
I I love that, and I love how philosophical this whole thing has become, and I really appreciate you taking your time to come in to just let me pick your brain and share your knowledge and intelligence with everybody. So I really appreciate you coming in.
And again, like my wife says, I'm just an old line roaring, and unfortunately, some people may say I'm full of it, which I probably am at least half the time, but maybe if you'll just pick out the fourth of the time that I'm not full of it, maybe we could have some good things that would happen.
I don't think you're full of it. I think that a lot of the things you've said, if not all, are spot on, and I really appreciate your time.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep.